Hello and welcome to Showband Heroes, where we get to meet the men and women who created the most successful live music era in Irish history and who entertained us throughout the 60s and 70s and kept us dancing with each other even during our darker days. My guest today is Pat Kelly. You're very welcome, Pat. Great to see you.
Thank you, Stephen. Nice to see you. Haven't seen you for quite some time. Very good to see you once again.
We go back a long way.
We surely do. We won't give anything away here.
No, we'll pretend we're still in our early 20s.
Yeah, right, okay.
Pat, look, there are very few people who have had the longevity, the career that you've had. You still managed to keep on playing with the top bands. Where did it all begin for you?
I suppose it's any type of music besides the bass. Like everybody, I suppose I started off on the old 6-string. The first thing I ever did was, my father was very musical. He always wanted to learn music, but he hadn't a note or a beat in his head. So in the early 60s, 63, 64, he bought an accordion, two button rows, that's what you call it, accordion. Couldn't play it himself. So one night he looked at me sideways and I knew he was going to ask me to learn it. And I went away anyway, and I made a stab at the accordion, but it wasn't really my thing. So then he decided maybe it might like to learn the piano. And I hummed and hawed and said, I'm not sure, but I'll give it a go. So he got in contact with this woman who taught me at night, every Monday night. Gave it a shot for a few weeks. And I didn't like it because it was strictly learning dots. So this woman was very, how will I put it, disciplined. And I didn't like it and I gave it up. So he then started buying records in maybe 63, 64. I noticed Cliff Richard, Buddy Holly, Adam Faith coming into the house. And I started listening to this and I started taking things in. And then I decided the guitar is the way to go, because I looked at all the bands that were starting to come in at the time, e.g. maybe the Bachelors, the Beatles and the Stones were starting, Jerry and the Pacemakers, the Foremost coming to my head, and I couldn't spot a piano anywhere, right? As we call it now, keyboards, but in those days it was a piano. So I probably figured to myself, the way to go with this is the guitar. So I had a few bob and I bought a guitar in a shop in Carlow called CG Electronics. I bought it for £3. So it was called a Seville, Saville, lovely sunburst one with the strings about 14 feet away from the neck, the usual at that time for £3. So I then went home with the guitar, I had a chord book, and I bought a mirror big enough to take the guitar and myself, full standing to practice my shapes. And after a while then I started buying books, English books maybe with the photographs of the bands in it. And I noticed this Fender Strat, probably with Hank Marvin. So I decided I would like an electric guitar. So what I did was I put a sheet of paper on the acoustic guitar and I painted the pickups and the 3 knobs, as I call them, and the tremolo arm onto it. And she looked much better. So started practicing and got most of the chords. Well, when I say most of the chords at the time, we'll call it a 3-chord trick, C, F, and G. And any song that I heard by the Bachelors or whoever, I could play it in 3 chords, even if they played it in 4 or 5. I said, they're wrong, I can do this in 3. So this was about 66, and I was in 5th class. I was due to do my leaving in 67. So in the actual class, there was 4 or 5 musos, as we'll call them, but I was sitting beside a particularly talented guy called Andy Conway. And he had bought a Hofner electric guitar, and he was actually quite good. And he told me he was going for lessons every Monday night to a guy in Carlow called Percy McAvoy. And there was about 6 guitar players, it wasn't one-to-one, it was just 6 lads in a room with Percy showing them different things. And he said, it's a great crack. and there's some nice players coming up, will you come along? So I went along anyway. And big song at the time, that arpeggio, the strings was by Freddie and the Dreamers, called I Understand. Everybody was practicing that at the time because you arpeggio the 6 strings and it sounded great. So we all got this. And after a while then Percy said, we have the makings of a band here, which are all guitar players. There's no bass player. We have 2 lead players and 3 rhythm players. Would anybody be interested in the bass? And nobody said anything. Then 2 or 3 lads started looking at me in the corner. So it was decided I was going to be the bass player. The next Monday night I went up, Percy had secured a bass from someone and I tried it. And I got on very well because I knew what it was about and I was big into bands at the time and I knew everything in the top 20, and to make it better, I knew most of the parts and I soon learned all the bass parts. Came to me quite easy at the time, and somebody might say I didn't improve much, but from then. So after about a month, we were in school one day and Andy was just talking to General. He said, hey, Head, I'm after joining a band. And I said, who's that? I said, it's a local showman in Carlow here called the Rainbow 7, which was, as the name states, 7 lads with big, bright, rainbow-coloured suits on them. And he said, we're looking for a bass player. I said, geez, Andy, I don't think I'll be up to that yet. He said, but you know the programme. I can show you the programme. It's a 3-hour programme. Every song on it, you will know. There might be 1 or 2 going back. Be my guest and a few things like that. And I said, Andy, I know, be my guest. So he said, come along to the rehearsal next Tuesday night in a local hall in Carlow. We'll have a bass guitar for you and we'll try it. Mm-hmm. So I went along anyway, and basically I went through a lot of the program, fairly easy. I knew most of it because I was glued to the radio all the time and listening to everything that was going on. And the boss in the band, a guy called Seamus Hayden, Seamus was the band leader, and Seamus said, well, that's good, Pat. You seem to have the program. You seem to be enjoying it. Would you be interested? Will you come in with us? I said, I will, Seamus, yeah. He said, no, there's one catch, Pat. This is Tuesday. He said, we're playing Thursday. I said, Seamus, 2 days. You can do it. He said, you know when a fella's stuck, he'll say to you, I know, you're up for it. You can do it. So I took it on. I said, I'd do it. And I remember the very first gig on a Thursday night in a place called Arles outside Carlow. And I took it from there, went on, stayed with Seamus. Didn't do great in the leaving cert now, mind you, because my mind was elsewhere. But I sauntered through it and passed it, but not for what my mother or father would have liked the results. But I got it. And then after I did the leaving, my mother came into vogue. Well, now, a real job. Where are you going to get a real job? You've heard of a real job before. I think every mother that has a son in show business wanted them to get a real job.
I got one for a very short while as well.
I had 1 or 2 briefly, but yeah. I got the first one. It was a trainee psychiatric nurse.
That would stand to you in a show band.
Yeah, that was in the John O'Gauldin private hospital in Dublin. So I went away anyway and said, look, I'll do the first year. But I was coming home at weekends to play with Seamus and taking time off and swapping hours. And after about 9 months, the head brother in John O'Gauld's called me aside and said, Pat, you're not really into this, are you? And I said, no. He said, well, look, I can see you're taking time off and I can see you're playing guitar going down the corridor. Maybe you'd be better off if you gave it up. So I gave it up, went back to Carlow, tail between the legs, and went back to Seamus and played away 68, 69, 1970. First professional chance came up, as we'll say. I knew somebody in Longford and he gave me a call. There was a band called Paddy Hanrahan and the Sahara Showband. I played with him. He wasn't doing a lot. He was doing all right, but I mean, it just meant I was stuck in Granard 5 nights a week because you don't go home from Granard to Carlow. You see, I didn't have a car at this stage. I started driving later in life, in my 30s, so whereas other lads had cars, I had none. So if Paddy Hannon was doing 2 nights a week, it wasn't really viable for me to go home to mother and father's place that often. So I left Paddy Hannon in early 72. and you had left the Cowboys to go to another band. You had a bass player from Clonmel standing in, and the Cowboys were they were a very popular band. They were what we'll call an area band, very big in Munster, very big in Leinster, and up the coast, we'll say Kerry, Cork, Limerick, up to Clare. Yeah. And that was their area. So we wouldn't have travelled up above Athlone. But there was enough gigs at the time. The Cowboys were doing 5 nights, as you know, 5 and 6 nights a week, summer and winter. They were big enough. So they had been playing a marquee in a County Carlow in a place called Burris on a Wednesday night. And as in those times, as you will know, the Cowboys would have had what we call a relief band, 3 or 4 lads to go on before them. And one of the relief bands that was on that Wednesday night was a guy, a great character from Carlow called G.I. Brennan. So they must have spoken to G.I. because I got a call on the Thursday from G.I. Pat, I have something to run by you. Can you meet me in town? I went in, he said, I was playing in front of the Cowboys last night, and Gabe Brazel and the band leader, Jim Grace, were asking me, would I be interested in the gig? Now, G.I. wouldn't have played that type of stuff anyway. He wouldn't have liked it. So I said, would you take the gig? I said, I don't know, I'll give it a shot. John, or G.I. as he was called. So it was arranged I would ring, I think, Endo or Reardon, and told them who I was and I was interested in the gig, and they made arrangements for me to go along to the following Saturday night. I was playing in a rugby club in Carlow, but they were playing in the Ritz Ballroom, and they were very big in Carlow at the time, would have been packing the place. So I went in early anyway when they had the gear set up, and we did a few numbers, and I went off to my own gig, and I got a call on the Monday from Jim Grace to say, look, the gig is there if you want it. And I took it, and that was the start of a long line of, we'll call, full-time professional, non-real jobs, as my mother would say. The band started changing, then the original lead vocalist left and other guys started coming in. But I think I got until about 1974 out of it.
The original singer was Jerry Walsh, and
yeah,
I think Jerry left to join Maurice Mulcahy.
He went to Maurice Mulcahy. A guy from Dublin, if I recollect rightly, from the Hootenannies called Mike Feeney. Does that name ring a bell?
I remember Mike Feeney.
Mike Feeney came in instead of Jerry, and Mike lasted a few years. Great singer, completely different than Jerry, but he was also a great songwriter. Mike came in, and I stayed there with the original band until about 74, and then they started petering off. I think the guitar player, Gay, left to go to a band called the Real McCoy. You remember Mike O'Brien?
I do indeed.
You might have come across him. Yeah, Gay left, and it kind of started falling apart. You know, when original lads leave, and then guys come in and they're there for a month and they're gone. So I left, and I got an offer then from a guy from Galway called Johnny Carroll, the Magic Band.
Yeah.
Which was Kevin Walsh from Clogherhead, came out in a suit. He was a very small guy, came out in a suit full of Christmas lights. You remember that? Magic and the Magic Band. And I stayed there for about a year or two. They were a good band, but again, I was caught away from my base in Carlow in Galway. So I decided it wasn't viable, really.
The type of bands that you were playing, I mean, people might take it for granted that the Cowboys were strictly a country band. They weren't. They were a kind of a hybrid band. They played pop and they played...
Oh, the Cowboys, no, they were country, but I mean, I remember me personally doing the Turtles, number by the Turtles. I did a number by Little Jimmy Osmond. No, we were a dance band, but it wasn't, as you say, it wasn't all country. Even Jerry, the lead singer, would have been doing pop, we'll call it, whatever you want to call it, non-country at the time. So we weren't strictly a country band, even though we were the Cowboys with hats on us and tussles on us. You know, it was a very good band. The original band, after you left a good band, and that was your own thing. You were going a different direction, but they were very respected musically.
And they also had a nice way of doing country. They used 2 trumpets, almost like a Tex-Mex type sound, didn't they?
2 trumpets, which was a rarity. It actually, what it would remind me of today is semi-Mavericks type thing.
Yeah.
And that was back in the 70s. Yeah. And I think it's the two trumpets stood them out from everybody else. Everybody had trumpet and the sax and the bone, or whatever, trumpet and sax was the combination. But the two trumpets, nobody had. And actually, it was a great combination.
Bill Doherty was singing with him while you were there.
Bill was there, and Bill, with the two trumpets, Bill actually learned sax.
He was also one of the most sensational singers I've ever heard in my life.
I would class him out on his own at all stages. Unreal.
Yeah, unreal.
I mean, his forte, his great love was Marty Robbins.
Yeah.
Right. And if you turned your back and you were a Marty Robbins fan, you were listening to Marty Robbins.
Yeah.
Absolutely an unreal singer.
Yeah. And of course, Jerry had a lovely, rich country voice.
Jerry was a great, rich, how would you describe Jerry? Country version of Perry Como.
Yeah, I never thought of it like that.
In some ways, very rich and different country voice. Yeah. They were overall very good band. Very good band now, until they started going their different ways, and lads go their different ways, you know.
Yeah.
And when I think Gay Brazel was the first to leave. Yeah. And then after that, other lads started going, you know.
Yeah. And of course, Gay Brazel is one of the most highly respected session guitar players in the country. Now, he's a phenomenal player.
Still doing it. And the thing always amazed me about Gay, and he doesn't like anyone blowing trumpets for him, but the thing I used to enjoy about Gay, he could go from, who would have been country in those days? He could go from Merle Haggard to Bon Jovi. I know Bon Jovi weren't there in the 70s, but someone of their ilk.
Yeah. And
play both of them to perfection.
Yeah.
And he could play anything. And still to this day, that's the one thing I admired about him. You'll see in this country, there's actually brilliant country guitarists, geniuses, but that's what they are.
Yeah.
Whereas Gay could turn his hand at any, there again, we'll try that. Yeah, okay, we'll try that. Yeah, and he'll do it.
He was heavily influenced by perhaps the man that most of us think was the greatest all-round guitar player in the country, Barney Skillen from the Clipper Cards.
I remember Barney, yeah.
And I know that Gay, and of course, I grew up with Gay and with Dave Prim, God rest him, Dave Prim as well. These guys, they set the bar so high for us. I mean, it was just, you had to be on your best playing with either of those guys.
Yeah. Dave, now that you mention it, another incredible player.
Look, not only were you in some of the best bands, you played with some of the greatest musicians.
So, yeah.
So it's a great testimony to yourself that these guys wanted to play with you. What happened after
Magic Band, 74, 75? I will say periodically I went local. Local is what we call around your own area with a 2 or 3 piece. And I pleased my mother, and I got a real job in a place, in a factory in Carlow called Braun. And I went in originally when Braun opened in 75. I went in as a machine operator, and I very quickly rose to the production controlling office, and would have done well and was doing well. And one Friday night, I got amazing how things change. You're happy, and I was still happy, getting promotion, but still riding the bike up and down every day, no matter what job I was getting in there. And I got a phone call from Gay Brazel, back to Gay again, one Friday night, in a panic, Head, the way Gay talks. I'm stuck here. I said, what's wrong, Gay? We're looking for a bass player. The band was called Tweed. We're just this was about 75, 76. Tweed had been around for 2 or 3 years, making a little bit of waves. They were doing Kilkenny, Carlow, Waterford, very big business, but we're starting to break out. We're doing it slow because Tweed were a band that were doing something different that nobody else was doing. Tweed would have been doing Deep Purple and Pink Floyd, where everybody else was doing the Osmonds or something. Do you know what I mean?
Was that down to the fact that their singer was that type of Bob Seger type singer? Was it?
He was a Bob Seger, Joe Cocker. That was his thing, and he didn't like doing anything else. But it was starting to pay off, and they were starting to branch out. They sent me up 3 numbers first, one by the Drifters, Rory Gallagher and somebody else. But of course, Gay being Gay, to have everything to perfection, insisted on coming up to Carla for 2 nights to my place. We'll get everything right, Head, he said. No mistakes here. The lads in the band are particularly the same. So we rehearsed these 3 numbers in and out for the 2 nights. Went down to Wallingford, and I won't say sailed through it, but I did it. The boys didn't know Gay had been tutoring me for 3 days, but that doesn't matter. So I got the gig anyway, and came down the following week with the Marshall 412 that sent the van up for me and me Fender Jazz bass. I'm touring for the Proudest Punch. And actually, this will relate to you. One of their first hit singles was written by, God love him, Fran O'Toole, called 6 Days. Do you remember that?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, that was one of their first hits. Great song. Great
Was
song.
that because, Pat, was that because I think they were operating out of Top Line Promotions for a while?
No, Top Line was coming. Top Line was coming. They were with a fellow from Kilkenny called Paul Fenley. Paul used to manage the Black Aces very well at the time, but Tweed were expanding and was getting a bit big for Paul. So Tom and Jim Doherty, as you will remember, 55 Parnell Square, came into the picture, and we were all called up, and Tom sat at the far side of the desk looking out, telling us how things were going to be and what we would be doing with our time off. When you're off on, I remember this, and I laugh at times. When you're off on a Monday, we would expect you to be parading around the town or come to Dublin, possibly, if you can, he said, 1 or 2 of you every Monday night to the TV club. Always be seen in nice slacks, a nice shirt, and a well-polished pair of boots. Never let yourself down, he said. If you want to grow a beard in the band, you do it during the holidays. You stay in until you have the beard to your length, he said. Don't be going around because you have to act like stars, he says, because you're going to be stars.
They were managing the biggest stars in the country, weren't they? I mean, they had the Miami, they had Dickie's band.
Dickie's band, the Diarros came into it after. They had Derek and the Sounds, all glam bands. That's where Tom was coming from. And I think back and laugh. He was right. You had Derek and the Sounds coming down to meetings there. We used to come, there'd be 2 or 3 bands in the 3 stories they owned. And they came from Vegas. They all got out of the big bus coming from Oma, but they looked $1 million.
Well, Derek Mahaffey always looked $1 million, didn't he?
But all the band. I met Derek a few years ago with Robert Mizzell, and he didn't look the same, but he still looked $1 million. But this was instilled into us with the Dohertys. So you were called to a meeting once a month. Anyway, we went with Top Line Promotions. Things started to take off. Then after a few months, you know, when you notice something is starting to blossom, we started to take off in Mayo, which was a huge, huge dancing town. And I tell you who was coming on board and was helping us at the time was Horselips.
All right.
Horselips were doing it differently, as you know. So people were saying, sure, Tweed or Semi doing the same. Yeah, Horselips, from my recollection, were the first band to go, as we used to call it, to mic up, right? The big PA. Tweed were the second. We got a big PA in from America, Serwin Vega, and we got a sound engineer over from Birmingham. He worked with UB40, a fellow called Bob Doyle. Set us up with this PA, and everybody was saying, what are all the mics for, lads? What's that down? What's the cigarette machine doing down the floor? You used to have a fellow called Ken Blackmore. I don't sell cigarettes, I'm doing sound. Because they never saw a desk down the floor before. Tweed were the second to do that. So it started blossoming in Mayo. And Mayo had a huge dancing, Ballina, massive. Then it started to blossom for us in Donegal. And it took off. Around about 1980, we were huge, massive. Never forget it. And that went on then 83, 84. And again, like happens with all bands, I suppose, 1 or 2 lads started to leave. And then eventually the front man, which was very, as you said earlier on, very central to the whole thing with his unique voice, Brendan, decided he'd had enough and he wanted out. You know, Tweed was known for Brendan Ryder and the congas out front and doing Pink Floyd time and this type of thing, and all that went. And I think, when it starts breaking up, and when you're known for something like a lead singer and the congas out front, I think when that goes, the whole thing semi goes.
And the strange thing about this is when the show bands, when they started first, before you and I were playing, they were essentially, they had come from behind the music stands. They were dance bands, and they came out front, and that's why they were, and put on a bit of a show.
Yeah.
But it didn't stop there. It evolved from there. But essentially, the bands played dance music. It was almost like Strictly Come Dancing in a way. But bands like yourselves, Tweed, the Gentry, maybe with Ciara Doherty, bands like that, the Freshmen.
You had a few bands, you had.
But it wasn't dance music.
From the north, you had Chips came along.
Yeah, Chips. Also the Freshmen and the Plattermen with Rob Strong, but they weren't dance bands. So, do you think that the bands who structured danceable music fared better, or did they become country bands, or what happened? How did you get away with it? Basically, that's what I'm asking you. With going into dance halls and not playing music that you say were dance.
Yeah, dance. I know. Yeah, our type of program. I can give you certain numbers we did. You see, we were classed as a word in the business that nobody liked, as a heavy band.
Yeah.
Right. You'd have promoters. Oh, geez, they're very heavy. I can't use them. But a lot of the time, we were drawing a young, semi-rough crowd, but rough in the good sense. They were just into it. They were bopping up and down. We would open up with the likes of Huey Lewis and the News, or Since You've Been Gone, Rainbow, that type of stuff. They weren't really. They were just hopping around. What was in later years had been called headbanging, but it wasn't called headbanging at the time. And no matter, even if we were doing Pink Floyd with the Clocks, they were still bopping and hopping around. I don't think they knew what they were at half the time.
Is it true that you actually did most of Dark Side of the Moon in your set?
Yes, a hell of a lot of it, and that was took a lot of rehearsal. We were sitting down one day talking about rehearsing. Do you know? And a lot of people laugh at this when I tell them. You might relate or might not relate. Of all our program, the hardest songs in Tweed to rehearse and get right was what a lot of people class as, they laugh at them, 3-chord trick, Status Quo.
Yeah. Because it has to be really, really tight, doesn't it?
Yeah, it has to be tight, because Status Quo's technique was double tracking, treble tracking, 2 guitars. So when you listen to Quo and the young lads said, how did I get that sound? Yeah. There was about 6 guitars on it. So we used to have to rehearse it with 2 guitars. Now we had 2 great rhythm players in Brendan Ryder and Gay to get the little finger thing. But they were one of the hardest bands to ape or copy, believe it or not. And if you said that to a muser now, they'd laugh at you. Status Quo, 3-chord trick, bang, take them away.
I think the same thing can be applied to the Sex Pistols. I remember listening to the big album that they had, and thinking to myself, I mean, this guy is like incredibly tight. I actually thought it was Chris Spedding, because they were using his studio at the time. But it was the guitar player from the Sex Pistols. Yes. And the fact that he was laying down another track on top of that, the fact that it was himself, he knew exactly what he had played in the first place. So you're absolutely right. Getting those things tight, and people laugh.
And I suppose to a certain degree, a lot of bands had their own little tricks and techniques. Somebody told me one time, you might relate to this as a bass player, that all those great Thin Lizzy songs with the 2, Scott Gorham and Brian Robertson, doing twin guitars, and every heavy metal handyman in Carlow or Carrick-on-Shore, how do they get this? Did somebody tell me they played it in A, giving you an example, and when the young lad bought the record, they used to be in either A flat or B flat, and the young lads couldn't figure it out. Someone told me one time that's what Lizzy did. They record in a G or an A, bring her up or bring her down then for general release. And every young lad in the country is scratching his head.
Right.
They all had their own tricks and things. But that's just sidetracking the status quo. But we did a lot of Pink Floyd stuff, which was very intricate as well, and took a lot of time in the rehearsal hall in Hurlingford through the years, you know.
Yeah, but for a band like yourselves, for want of a better word, a heavy band, and you had the appearance of being heavy, because even your PA system, the Showband Heroes system, was gigantic.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you're right. I did Johnny Feeney from Horselips, who I played with for a long, long time. I mean, I think they used a crane to get their system up into the sea point in Galway.
They did, and I'll tell you how that came about. That came about from Horselips refusing to carry the Hammond C3. It wasn't the actual PA. Well, they did in the end, but the reason that crane came in was for the Hammond C3. The roadies refused, and if you've played with the Hammond C3, they are heavy. We had one with Tweed, and we had to carry it up ourselves up the sea point. But the roadies with Horselips refused. And anytime they played, which, as you know, was a huge gig, you didn't refuse to play it. They had to get a crane for the Hammond. That's what created it initially. I mean, the weight of that Hammond, it weighed the same as an average gear van, you know.
I also heard that you guys nearly gave Bros Walsh a heart attack over in
what do you call it?
Was it Falcara or Belcara? Belcara.
Oh, he had a little small hall shaped like, you know, a 50-cent piece. Strange shaped hall. And the stage was very small now. I remember the first time we went in there, we looked at the stage and Brendan Ryder scratched his head and was about to do a reverse out the door, you know. And Ross's son, I forget his name, was in charge at the time. He said, "But that's fine, lads. Ray Lynham was here last week. He fitted on the stage and the hall was packed." And we tried to explain to him, we can't fit on the stage. Yeah. So we played on the floor. Oh, he nearly had a heart attack. Yeah, but the place was jammed, and we went back there and we played on the floor every time. But the first time, he was going to have a coronary. Wouldn't work. No way, lads. This will not work. Can some of you know? Then he came up with a suggestion. Maybe if two of you could stay out of the band for the night, at least two. If you could decide what two you don't want, the rest of you go up on the stage. He came up with everything, but no, we weren't shifting. Brendan was still scratching the head at the back door. He hadn't come in. Yeah. Oh, he took it very bad. But after the gig, then all was fine. When he saw the crowd, counted the money, and we were back.
And the thing is, as you said, when you started to break big in Mayo. I mean, there was an old saying that if you break the West, you can live there. There's so many dances happening.
Oh, yeah. At that particular time, I could name 10 gigs in the West, from Charlestown to Enniscrone to Ballina to Castlebar. And we'd have all or half the same crowd every night. If we played 3 nights in Mayo and they were 50 miles apart, we'd see the same faces. They just stuck to us and followed us through thick and thin.
And that happens to this day. If you get back together with the lads, which you've done a couple of times, it's a bit like Horselips, a very loyal crowd, don't you?
Oh yeah. Horselips the same, very similar, And then of course we started breaking in Donegal, which was a bigger county again, you know, and that was phenomenal. You know, Donegal, now Horselips were kings in Donegal, always had been at that stage. Yeah. But we did very well out of Donegal as well now.
Did you move east then? Did you play the north?
We didn't go into the north until about 82, 83. The reason we didn't go into the north, besides the troubles, the main man out front, Brendan Ryder, had this blank in front of north, no. And he I don't know, he just, was it fear or what? He just didn't want to go. And we eventually got down on our knees and begged him. We got an offer of a great date in Cookstown in a ballroom. I remember the promoter was Brendan Mulgrew. You go down the length of Cookstown and turn right. Great gig, offered us great money. And Brendan hummed and hawed. And he said, I'll tell you, I'll go up if they meet us at the border. Myself and Gay thought to ourselves, but what difference is that going to make? the two, Brendan Mulgrew in the car and his wife behind in another car. But whatever happened, this pleased Brendan. So we went up through Monaghan, Aucknaclyde. Before we got to Aucknaclyde, little tire garage on the left, we pulled in there, and Brendan came down with himself driving one car and his wife and a daughter in the other car. He led the way. We were in the middle and the wife was behind, but sure, that meant nothing. But Brendan was happy.
Security detail.
Security, in his eyes, this is it. We're minded, you know. So we started doing the North after that for a while. And then, as I say, he left. But
and how was that received in the North, the type of music that you were playing?
Received very well. We had a great first night because I suppose we were so different, and Brendan had done a big PR hype on us as the band down south that are doing blah blah, what nobody else is doing. Went down the storm now, fair. And there was nobody really up there doing what we were doing, you know.
Yeah. Would the Plattermen have been something similar?
The Plattermen would have been something similar. The Plattermen were lodged more into big brass numbers. The big Plattermen thing was Blood, Sweat and Tears, Chicago, which Rob Strong, as the second vocalist in the band, had the voice for.
Rob was very influenced by David Clayton Thomas.
Oh, anyway. Sure, he had him to a T. That's what I'm saying. Their more basic thing was, they were heavy as well, but they were heavy in a totally different sense to us. They were doing, which was heavy enough, Chicago, 25 or 6 to 4 and all that stuff. Very intricate stuff. But they were a great band as well. Great band.
But the Plattermen hedged their bets because they had Simon Scott there, and Simon he was sort of the poster boy, wasn't he? Really?
He was, yeah. Simon could do the Engelbert Humperdinck. Yeah. Then you could have your man doing 25 or 6 to 4. They had both ends of the coin.
Obviously, the question has to be asked: for a band of your type to progress, you had to get into original material. So you started writing your own stuff, didn't you?
Brendan and Gay started writing basically because they didn't really, I suppose, to uncomplicate things, leave it to two lads. Lads were saying in the band, but you know, why can't we all write? Why can't we all have our name on this? And then we sat down and we decided, look, leave it to the two boys. They're good at their job, and it's not as if they're going to make a massive amount of money that we don't make. Do you know what I mean? There was nothing paid for songwriting then, so the boys did it all, and they did a good job on it. And we started bringing in what they would write into our program, and it was accepted. And in actual fact, the band had 2 or 3 or 4 original hits written by the lads, and it was good stuff.
I think one of the popular misconceptions in the business, when people look back at the Showband era, they say there was a lack of originality in it. But the problem was that you weren't allowed to do it by most of the dance halls. They didn't want bands coming in doing original material. They wanted, we often called it McDonald's music that people understood.
Like, I mean, you had the biggest band ever in the country, in my eyes, would have been the Royal Showman, right? Yeah. I think they changed the whole thing. I think a man from Carlow, TJ Byrne, took through. I think he was one of the first to instigate, throw away those music stands and put on a show. Yeah. I think he invented the word showband. But I mean, if you look at the top 3 bands in the country that time, you might remember the Royal were first from Waterford. Definitely second was the Dixies from Cork, right?
Yeah.
And third probably stemmed to Dickie and the Miami. But I mean, the first 2 were non-Dublin bands. But the point I'm making is that you're making as well. All those bands, if you went to see them, say in the Ritz in Carlow, Wednesday week, Wednesday fortnight, they were all doing the same program.
I always thought there was about 5 bands. You couldn't really say. The Royal had the biggest single ever in the Huckle Book, and Brendan was there earlier on. Yeah. Of course, they had Tom, who had made the British charts with a Come Down the Mountain, KDD.
That's right. Yeah.
Which was the first thing. I would certainly put the Capital Showband in there.
The Capital were in the top 5, yeah. I gave you the first 2. It had to be in that order. You had the Miami, then the Capital. Don't know who after that.
Yeah, Eileen Reid. Eileen Reid broke all the ground for the women as well.
She did, of course, yeah.
Again, it depended, because there was things like the Showband show were happening on on the television at the time.
Mm.
Terrible pity it's all been wiped. But I remember when Eileen, I was talking to her the other night, when she came out with a song called "I Gave My Wedding Dress Away."
I remember it. Yeah.
And now talk about a show. She walked up around the center aisle of the right up through the crowd wearing a wedding dress. It was. I mean, this was classic show, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, show. Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
So your material, your original material, you fitted as much in as possible.
Oh yeah, we slipped it in quietly, as they say, in the back door.
Yeah.
And it was accepted. You know.
So, but that ran its course too. Tweed ran its course, didn't it? And what happened after that?
I left in 88 or 89. I decided, my father had a chauffeur, Hackney business in Carlow, and health was getting to him and he was feeling a bit bad. And he had a lovely Granada car at the time. That's kind of what changed me mind to it. He said, "Will you take over the business? I'm not able to do it anymore, and you can have the car." So when I heard this, "You can have the car," I said, "Well, maybe I'll think about it." Yeah. And I took it over then. And again, busy enough with that. And I went local. We'll go back to the went local, 2 or 3 piece, peeling around. One day I was out at a friend of mine's house, a guy from Carlow called Ollie Hennessy.
Is that the Hennessy's, the music show?
The Hennessy Music, yeah. Ollie was an MD in RTE for a long time. And I was out in the house one day and this guy came in, again, an ex-friend of mine who I wouldn't have seen for a while, a guy called Eamon McRory. Eamon's claim to fame was he was with a band called Two's Company.
Oh, yeah.
Very successful 2-piece cabaret band for years, very successful. Did very well in England and America. And Two's Company were after breaking up, and Eamon was on the, "What are you doing, Eamon?" "I'm doing nothing." "What are you doing, Pat?" I said, "I'm doing nothing, Eamon. Would you be interested in doing something?" So I said, "What had you in mind?" Well, he said, "We could do a 3-piece. I have a guy that might be interested, a great guitar player now. I mentioned him to you, might know him, a fellow called Jimmy Byrne from Castlecomer. Jimmy was famous for Art Supple and the Victors. And then his next claim to fame was, in the big cabaret days, there was a very successful cabaret band in this country called Just Four.
Oh, I remember them, yeah, of course I do.
Arthur O'Neill, the Hopkins brothers, Arthur O'Neill, and the guitar player called Jimmy Byrne. Just Four were very successful, managed by a guy for years called Noel Carthy. And then the cabaret scene just fell apart and the boys fell apart. So Jimmy was hauled in by Eamon McRory and we started rehearsing. Very, very good, a good 3-piece now. And we were called the Three Amigos. Way before there's the current Three Amigos. We had that first, the name first, back in the mid-90s. And we did a few years on that. And Eamon then decided he'd had enough. He'd been at it for 40-something years and he was going to go to Australia. His family, his son and daughter were in Australia. And we were finishing up and he said to me one day, I was talking to a guy called Billy Morrissey, he said, from Banshee. "Do you know him?" I said, "I do, yeah." Billy, Norman and Louise were the Morrisseys. You would have known them. He said, "Louise, who was doing very well at the time, probably the biggest female country singer in the country at the time, and had a great band. But he said, Norman is playing bass and he's leaving. Would you be interested in the gig?" And I said, "I wouldn't mind it, yeah." I wasn't doing much. The taxi had kind of gone down. The Hackney had kind of bottom fallen out at this stage. So I went along one Sunday night. They were playing in a gig outside Carlow in a big lounge, and I did a few songs, and Billy and Norman came up after and said, "But sure, look, if you want to do the gig, it's there, but it won't be coming up for 2 months. Norman's not finishing for 2 months. And we're going on tour in England with Dominic Kerwin. Would you be interested in starting there? Norman just doesn't want to go to England, and they're going to be 6 to 8 weeks away at a time, right?" So I thought about it and discussed it and decided I'd do it. Dominic Kerwin, they were supporting Dominic because they were both in an organisation called Ritz Records. Mick Flavin, you might have heard.
Yeah.
Mick managed Dominic and he was trying to break Louise in Britain. So he decided he'd take the hit and bring Louise's full band every night. There was about 20 musicians to be paid between the two bands. But we started, and Dominic was huge in England. We were doing all the big, the INE, the Symphony Hall in Birmingham, all the big places, 2,000-3,000 seaters. Dominic was that big, you know.
Yeah.
So we were doing that for 6 weeks. We'd come home. We do that maybe 2 or 3 times a year. And after about a year and a half, we were showing how, as people used to say, you're lucky. We were in on another 6-week stint with Dominic, and the bass player, something happened to him. He went home overnight. Dominic used to be away. We were away for 6 weeks. Dominic could be gone for 3 months, you know.
Oh, yeah.
So young bass player, lovely lad, but he just couldn't handle it anymore, couldn't take it. So the two bands were having what we call a session one night after a show. We were off on the Monday. So we'd be off until Tuesday, and we'd maybe let the hair down a bit. We had hair then, let it down on the Sunday night. And Dominic just said after a few vodkas, would you do the gig, he says, with me after you play with Louise every night? And I said, Jesus, I don't know, would the Morrisseys be too happy with that, you know? You know, me going on with me Morrissey suit, taking a break and getting into Dominic Carvin's suit and go back out on the stage.
Why not?
3-4 hours a night. So I discussed it with the boys, and Billy said, well, sure, look, it doesn't make any difference to us. I mean, we wish you the best luck. You'll get double the spawns, you know, as he said, which I did. Great time for me. And I did that for the current tour, 6 weeks. And then Dominic said to me, look, I know the Morrisseys well, he said, but I don't want to infringe, but will you come in with me? I said, I don't know, give me a week to think about it. And again, I was weighing it up and down. They were in England all the time. He was huge up the north. He'd go from the north from England. He'd do a few concerts down south, but it meant I was traveling to Oma all the time. So I declined the offer, and I stayed with Louise. And it would have been a good gig because Dominic was doing well. But I mean, all the boys in the band were from the north. They were all from the one area. I would have been the odd one out and traveling up from Carlow at 3. In those days, no motorway. You were traveling 3.5 hours to Oma. So I turned it down. So I stayed with Louise. And after that, I got a call from a guy I knew, guitar player, Martin Cleary.
Fabulous player, isn't he?
Fabulous country player, great country player and a great singer, and produced a lot of records. He said to me, would you be interested in a change? And I said, I don't know, Martin. I'm fairly happy here. I had the Morrissey's wagon to bring home, you see, the big, if you remember the big Mercs, the old 708s or 70 something. I had the use of that with free diesel. And I said, what's the gig? He said, Mick Flavin, who was huge at the time. They call him King of Country, but he was doing very well now, drawing big crowds. I thought about it and I said, yeah, I'll go up and give it a go. Went up one night to the Well in Moat, did an audition. Mick said, yeah, if job is there if you want it. And I went in there, and I stayed there for 2 or 3 years, and I bring myself now to 1990, maybe 6. I might be a year out either way on any of my stories. We'll say 96.
It's a big difference playing with a band like Tweed and then getting into a highly disciplined band playing country. I mean, Louise Morrissey has a sensational voice, and she's one of the finest.
She was, to me, she was the finest female country singer in the country. And I still, even to this day, when I hear the old saying, hairs on the back of your neck come to my mind.
Louise Morrissey's version of Sleeving Them On is beautiful.
But the point you were making is, yes, a lot of people wouldn't have been able to do it. The discipline of, how did I describe it to a heavy metal handyman one that was trying to put me down for what I was playing? Yeah, the discipline of the 2 to the bar. Or the 4 to the bar, or yourself and the drummer are married because the bass drum and yourself are one. Discipline is very hard, and a lot of bass players would not be capable or prepared to do that. Do you know what I mean? You would understand that now as a bass player. Say, coming from playing Lemmy and the Rickenbacker and going into to Louise Morrissey to do a Patsy Cline number. Wouldn't be able to do it. It took me a while. I got it. And it took me a while to get the Nashville. You may be familiar with the Nashville style of bass playing.
Yeah.
The root note thing, when you're changing, you're the last note, you know it. Your last note is always your root note. Took me a while to get that. Great discipline in that. And when you know it, it's a great form of playing. And well, it didn't take me a while. I got it very fast. The Nashville 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 form of reading.
It's a different way of thinking, isn't it?
Completely different.
When you spoke about status quo, it is the same type of discipline, isn't it? It's the same type of that you've got to be very aware of what everybody else is playing and fulfilling your role, which is almost like a minimalist role, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah, it surely is. Yeah.
The sound is also different. There's a bit of a grind when you're playing Bob Seger or any of that. So the sound. Did you have to change your sound, or the feel of the note and holding?
Well, when I in my call it pop days, I had a special sound that I liked, and it came from an Ampeg SVT. To me, and I'm old-fashioned, they're still number one. I was with Flavin. Yeah, I'm probably 97, 98. I heard about this. The whole country had heard about this new boy starting out. He had a massive hit before he ever went on the road, written by a friend of mine called Henry McMahon. A guy from Castledermot in Kildare called Michael English. Michael had a massive hit with The Nearest to Perfect. And he was doing a two-piece locally, but he'd never done a ballroom or nothing. It was the number one hit everywhere. Yeah. So Henry McMahon met Michael and he decided they were going to form a band. So I knew Michael from playing around Carlow, and he would have known my son or daughter, I think. But I met him one day in Carlow. I was walking, just going down, sorting out a few things in Carlow, and I met Michael, and he called me. And he said to me, I'm forming a band. He said, would you be interested in coming in with me and helping along doing the band leader? And you might get some musicians. So I thought about it, and I decided I'd go. This boy, before he ever went out and got into a van, was huge. Sometimes that happens. You have a massive hit before you go out at all. So we got the band together. We got into famous Martin Cleary in it. And we got two boys from Antrim, McMullen brothers, and a drummer from Portlaoise, Tony Fitzpatrick, nicknamed Squeaky. But we started off anyway. Did a load of rehearsal in Castledermot for about a month. Henry had a full diary before anybody ever heard him. We started on a Thursday in Wexford. The first week we did was Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And this particular man closed doors every night. Now, when I say closed doors, I mean capacity crowds. Some people would laugh and say closed doors, nobody came. That particular weekend, everywhere was black. And it continued that way.
But he's also hugely talented, Michael English.
Oh, great. Great talent, great tuneful singer, great piano player, absolutely brilliant. Yeah. Everything going for him, and still doing well to this day. Yeah. But I only stayed there less than a year. I left that, and again for a few months I went back, as we call it, the famous word, local. And I'd seen a few posters in Carlow at different times in windows for this guy with long blonde hair down on his shoulders with an Ovation guitar, and he's standing with his foot on the guitar, and he was an American guy called Robert Mizzell, going around the pubs in the Midlands doing the solo, just himself and the guitar. And I heard a few people saying, you should look him up, he's very good. So I never thought anything about it. I came in from a gig one Sunday night, and on the answering machine was a friend of mine from the Showband days called Tommy Swarbrick. And Tommy had said, Pat, I heard you were looking for a gig. I'm starting to manage a guy here. He's an American guy. He's called Robert Mizzell. I'm going to put a band behind him. Would you be interested? And we went up one day and did a busk around and did 2 hours rehearsal. And it was great. Great guitar player, great drummer. We had a great keyboard player, a friend of mine called Donnie Duggan. And the band sounded really well. So we decided, we'd go ahead with it. What was big at the time was Garth Brooks. So Tommy said, will you do a Garth Brooks tribute band? And Mizzell was great at this. He could take Brooks off. One thing about him, he's an American, he's a great singer.
Yeah.
So there was Garth Brooks tribute bands around, but he was the bee's knees, I have to say it. He was great. And we started doing good business. We were on the road about a year and a half, and we were playing one night in Longford. And I could see guys, we were playing in a big pub, the Tangled Web it was called, and across the road was the Longford Arms. There was a band on there the same night. The Conquerors were on. I knew the Conks from the old days. I could spot them at the back of the hall, back in the pub. And in between them was the manager, the Don, as we call him, a fellow called Willie Carty. I don't know if you know him also.
Oh, I know Willie well, yeah.
Yeah, Willie was there anyway. I knew they were in it. Doc and how the Yank, as I call him, how Robert was. They'd heard about him. Word was getting out about this guy, this American great singer, can do really good things. So, following day, Robert got a call from Willie Carty. Our first date, we finished up doing Garth Brooks in October. Our first date as Robert Mizzell and the Country Kings was the 1st of November 1999. Then Willie presented him with this song that he had heard on the TG4 program by Desi Halloran, who you may be familiar with, kind of a singer from Connemara, had this old American bluegrass song called Say You Love Me, done differently. But Willie sent it to us and he said, I have a different idea on this now. I want to make it Cajun, and I'm going to get the Conks to record it, the two boys, Tony and Frankie. I'm going to get them to record it in Headford. Robert didn't like the song. Yeah. He was persuaded to go up to the studio and do it, which he did in with the boys' arrangement, which turned out very well anyway, very Cajun-y. And all of a sudden, for no reason, the song took off, massive, everywhere, huge. I was talking earlier on about Michael English, how a song takes off. This Say You Love Me just zoomed, forgive the expression, zoomed out the door. And bookings started coming in, and within 2 months, Robert Mizzell was packing everywhere. This was about 2001, packing everywhere. So, with a few changes in the band, and he asked me would I manage the band. And I did that from about 2003 until 2016. I decided to retire. I just, you know yourself how I felt. I just had enough. I was traveling a lot on my own, because at this stage now the band members were so spread. You could have Donegal and a fella from Killarney and a fella from which we had from the furthest point south in Wexford. So a band personnel wagon was no good. So what it meant was everybody was traveling their own way, and I was traveling on my own. There was nobody from my area. I found myself doing the guts of 1,000 miles a week, changing the car every year, because you have 60,000 miles on it after a year. And I just decided, Stephen, this was in 2016. I said, I'm 65 now, going to 66. I've done it for 50 years. That's it. And I just gave me notice. Said I'm finishing up in September, and that was it. Just got tired, maybe, basically, I suppose. Not laziness or anything. I'd worked hard for with all my time in it, with travelling and everything else. I just decided that was it. I didn't.
You went out on a high, didn't you? I mean, that.
High, yeah, but just didn't. The way I felt, didn't want to do it anymore. Didn't enjoy it, you know.
No.
You know.
So when you look back on it, you played with such diverse types of from the heaviest band
to the lightest.
To the lightest, yeah. I remember seeing you in down in the Hazel Tree, I think in Malin. That was called the Hazel Tree, Georgia.
That's right, yeah. I remember that.
I mean, it was pretty intense because I mean, first of all, it was strict tempo. You had your, your foxtrots and your quick steps and your waltzes and all that. You had them down to a T. But it was bang, 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 one after another. You didn't give people a chance to.
That's the secret. You do. It's very strict in the sense it's 3 fast, 3 slow, 3 fast, 3 waltzes, but they move.
Yeah.
I don't mean tempo wise. They move 1, 2, 3. You don't give them a chance, because most people that get up will stay up for the 3 anyway. So dance, give them a break, not too long a break, back again. So it is very disciplined and very fast, as you what you were saying. Yeah, bang, bang, bang.
And you certainly played the North with Robert Mizzell, didn't you?
Oh God, yeah. The North very big for country. 60% of our work would have been up the North. And if you look up and even go dancing or look at them, they're more into country up the North. And I'll tell you what the North has. The great majority of the younger people up North, more so than down South, are into jiving and waltzing and country. For some reason, I don't know, the same amount of younger people in their 20s down South wouldn't be into country music. But if you go to Cookstown or Roma and pick out 10 people in their 20s, 8 of them will be country music fans and dancers.
The one thing that has sustained is the dancing, hasn't it?
Oh,
so
yeah.
I think maybe is dancing sort of some kind of a participation, so where the band and the audience kind of gel, and there's a massive connection there, isn't there?
Massive connection, yeah. That's it, yeah. That's part of the secret.
Yeah, and it's down to something that you mentioned earlier on, to be able to synchronize the bass and the drums.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, and the rhythm guitar. It's not about showboating when it comes to some lads taking a solo for a 10-minute solo. Or
No.
Dancing has outlived the idea of the actual show.
It has, of course, all the time. Yeah.
When I was working with various musicians over the years, I had a habit of asking them if they could relive one day with one band, just one day. What would it be? I mean, I remember asking when I was working in the studio with the great Henry McCullough, that obviously everybody knows now, started with the Showbands, but also went on to play with Joe Cocker in Woodstock, and of course joined Paul McCartney in Wings, and perhaps the greatest CV of any musician. And I remember asking Henry after a recording session one night, we were having dinner, and I said, if you could relive a day, what would it be? And I thought it'd be, some of the big moments in his life when, but he said it was that his day would be to go back to the time when he was playing with the Skyrocket Show Band. So yeah, that was. He said, I always remember. He said he laid back, and Henry was very laid back, and he laid back, closed his eyes, looked up at the ceiling, and said, "I can see it now." He said, "I'm 17 or 18, or what age it was," and he said, "I'm sitting on a wall." He said, and with the band suit, and I was wondering where is he going with this? With the band suit, and he said. And what did he call it? And the old piece of wood, which was his guitar, that's what he called the guitar, the old piece of wood. Yeah. And he said, and every few minutes I'm looking down the road to see if the Skyrockets van is coming up the road.
Yeah.
So if you were to say one day in one band,
the Royal Albert Hall,
right,
in 1973, with the Cowboys doing a big British country music special. The Royal Albert Hall, the place was black.
Yeah.
To me, that was, call it what you want.
Yeah, I played the Albert Hall.
I have loads of highlights. I could give the Birmingham Symphony Hall with Dominic Herman with 3,000 or 3,500. But the thing that I like to remember is the Royal Albert Hall. And when I look back, I was actually looking at a video the other night of Eric Clapton, and I said, I played there.
And when you walk up that tunnel, from the dressing rooms, and you walk onto the stage, and this huge expanse of people sitting down, and then you've got the boxes all around as well. There's nothing like it, is there?
That's nothing like it. It was a big special. There was 2 or 3, I can't remember them now, big American acts, and it was a very big English country singer at the time, Tex Withers,
yeah. He was a Johnny Cash tribute.
Tex Withers was the English star on it. We were the Irish stars, and there was 3 or 4 American stars. But the place was just black. And I couldn't figure this out. Country music, the middle of London, completely stuffed. That's one day I remember. And
so that's the day you'd relive that if you got it.
Yeah, love to do it again. Someone lovely to talk to after all that we went through together.
Pat Kelly, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you and to meet up with you again, and to listen to your reminiscing. So many wonderful stories, wonderful bands, and such a diverse and successful career. You're not finished yet. So long may it last. And thanks very much.
And once again, nice to see you, and we'll talk again soon.
We will indeed.
Thank you very much.